Most people think attraction is built through giving more, proving more, and sacrificing more. They believe that if they can just love harder, explain themselves better, or remain patient long enough, the other person will finally recognize their value. But life teaches a different lesson. There comes a moment when a person reaches the end of their emotional rope. They stop pleading, they stop convincing, they stop chasing, not because they no longer care, but because they finally understand something powerful. No amount of effort can make someone appreciate what they are determined to overlook. And that is often the exact moment everything changes. The truth is that many people never recognize your worth while they have unlimited access to you. Human nature often overlooks what seems guaranteed. When your attention is always available, when your loyalty never wavers, when your presence feels permanent, people can become blind to the treasure standing right in front of them. Then one day, the treasure walks away. Not in anger, not in revenge, not with dramatic speeches or emotional ultimatums, just with peace, just with dignity, just with a quiet understanding that their value does not depend on someone else's recognition. That moment bruises the ego more than any argument ever could, because the ego survives on certainty. It wants to believe that you will always be there. It wants to believe that it controls access to your energy. It wants to believe that it can come and go without consequences. But when you genuinely release your attachment to the outcome, you introduce something the ego cannot control: uncertainty. And uncertainty creates reflection. Suddenly they begin remembering conversations they once ignored. They begin noticing qualities they once overlooked. They begin comparing everyone they meet to the person they assumed would never leave. What changed? You did. You stopped trying to force someone to see your value and started living as though you already knew it. That shift is profound, because confidence is not loud. Confidence does not announce itself. Confidence does not need to win arguments. Confidence simply moves forward, and nothing is more unsettling to someone who expected your pursuit than watching you thrive without their validation. Many people misunderstand respect. They think respect comes from being agreeable. They think respect comes from endless accommodation. They think respect comes from proving loyalty through self-sacrifice. But true respect comes from boundaries. It comes from standards. It comes from the willingness to walk away from what diminishes your spirit. Every great principle of life teaches the same lesson. What you tolerate teaches people how to treat you. What you permit becomes your reality. And what you consistently accept eventually becomes your identity. The moment you stop accepting crumbs, you remind others that you were never hungry for them in the first place. This is where transformation begins. Not when they change. When you change. Not when they apologize. When you heal. Not when they finally understand your worth. When you understand it yourself. Because the strongest position in life is not being desired by everyone. The strongest position is being unattached to the approval of anyone. That kind of freedom creates a presence people can feel. You walk differently. You speak differently. You make decisions differently. You no longer negotiate your value. And paradoxically, that is often when people begin seeing what was there all along. The avoidant personality is especially sensitive to this dynamic. When someone pursues them relentlessly, they often feel trapped. When someone withdraws with self-respect, they feel curiosity. When someone becomes emotionally dependent, they pull away. When someone becomes emotionally sovereign, they pay attention. Not because they are evil, not because they are heartless, but because human beings often recognize value through contrast. Absence creates perspective. Distance creates clarity. Silence reveals what noise concealed. And suddenly they find themselves thinking about the person they thought they had already figured out. They replay memories. They revisit conversations. They wonder why your energy feels different. The answer is simple. You stopped making them the center of your world. You became the center of your own. That is the real victory. Not making someone miss you. Not making someone chase you. Not making someone regret losing you. The real victory is becoming so aligned with your purpose that whether they return or not, no longer determines your happiness. Because when your life is built on purpose, your peace cannot be held hostage by another person's choices. You begin investing in your growth, your health, your mission, your future, your connection with something greater than yourself. And that creates a kind of power that cannot be faked. People can sense when someone is desperate for approval, but they can also sense when someone has found inner certainty. One repels, the other attracts. The irony is that the moment you no longer need their attention is often the moment they become fascinated by yours. But by then, something inside you has changed. You are no longer seeking validation. You are evaluating alignment. You are no longer asking, how do I keep this person? You are asking, does this person deserve access to my energy? That question changes everything, because it places responsibility back where it belongs, on both people, not just you. Remember this, your greatest power has never been your ability to convince someone of your worth. Your greatest power is your willingness to recognize it yourself. The moment you embrace that truth, you become untouchable. Not because life becomes easy, not because rejection disappears, but because your identity is no longer dependent on external approval. And when a person sees that they can no longer manipulate your emotions, control your attention, or predict your reactions, a deep level of respect emerges. Whether they admit it or not, whether they return or not, whether they understand it or not. Because nothing commands respect more than a person who knows their value, protects their peace, and continues moving forward with purpose. And nothing is more attractive than a soul that has stopped chasing validation and started walking confidently toward its destiny. Most people believe attraction grows when you give more attention, send more messages, make yourself more available, and constantly prove how much you care. It seems logical. If someone matters to you, you should show them. If you want to be appreciated, you should try harder. But human psychology often works in the opposite direction, especially when dealing with people who have avoidant tendencies. The moment you stop chasing is often the moment your value becomes visible. This is not a game. It is not manipulation. It is not about pretending not to care. It is about reaching a point where your self-respect becomes stronger than your need for validation. When that happens, your energy changes completely. Think about what happens when someone knows they have unlimited access to your attention. They know you will answer every message immediately. They know you will always forgive. They know you will always be waiting. Over time, your presence becomes predictable. Predictability itself is not bad. But when there are no boundaries, people often stop appreciating what is consistently available. Then something unexpected happens. You stop chasing. You stop trying to convince. You stop explaining your worth. You stop fighting for a position that should have been freely given. And suddenly, the dynamic changes. The person who was comfortable taking your attention for granted begins to notice its absence. They begin to notice the silence where your energy once existed. They begin to recognize that your life continues without their approval. This realization creates a powerful psychological shift because people naturally pay more attention to what they can no longer easily access. But the real transformation is happening inside you. When you stop chasing, you redirect that energy toward your own growth. Instead of obsessing over someone else's behavior, you focus on your goals. Instead of monitoring their actions, you invest in your future. Instead of seeking constant reassurance, you begin building genuine confidence. Confidence is attractive because it signals abundance. It communicates that your happiness is not dependent on one person's decision. It shows that your identity is rooted in something deeper than external validation. People can sense this difference immediately. Your words become calmer. Your actions become stronger. Your presence becomes more grounded. For an avoidant person, this shift can be especially powerful. They often pull away when they feel pressure, expectations, or emotional dependence. But when they encounter someone who is secure, self-directed, and emotionally independent, curiosity begins to replace resistance. The very space that once seemed threatening now becomes intriguing. The lesson is simple, yet profound. Attraction grows when you stop abandoning yourself in pursuit of someone else. The moment you genuinely value your own time, energy, and peace, you become far more compelling than when you were desperately seeking attention. Not because you are trying to create attraction, but because true confidence is naturally magnetic. The greatest power is not making someone miss you. The greatest power is becoming so focused on your purpose and growth that whether they notice or not no longer controls your happiness. That is when your value becomes undeniable, both to others and to yourself. One of the most misunderstood truths about human behavior is that people rarely evaluate what they have while they feel completely secure in possessing it. As long as they believe something will always be available, they often move through life without fully appreciating its value. This is especially true when it comes to relationships, emotional connections, and the people who consistently show up with loyalty and care. The ego thrives on certainty. It loves predictability. It loves knowing who will stay, who will wait, and who will continue investing, regardless of how little is given in return. When someone becomes accustomed to your attention, your patience, and your emotional availability, they may unconsciously begin treating those things as permanent fixtures rather than precious gifts. Then something changes. You stop trying to prove yourself. You stop negotiating for respect. You stop seeking validation from someone who has become comfortable with holding it. And in that moment, the ego experiences something it dislikes more than almost anything else: a challenge to its assumptions. What makes this challenge so powerful is that it does not come through conflict. It does not come through threats or dramatic confrontations. It comes through your absence from the role they expected you to play. They expected you to keep chasing. They expected you to keep explaining. They expected you to remain emotionally invested, no matter how little effort they contributed. When you no longer behave according to that script, their certainty disappears. This creates a psychological opening. The ego begins asking questions it never asked before. Why did they leave? Why are they no longer reacting? Why do they seem at peace without me? Why am I suddenly thinking about them so much? These questions trigger reflection, and reflection often leads to realization. For perhaps the first time, they begin looking at the situation from a different perspective. They start remembering your loyalty. They recall moments when you supported them. They recognize qualities they once overlooked because those qualities were always available. What was once invisible becomes impossible to ignore. This is why an ego wound can become a catalyst for awareness. Not because pain is the goal, but because discomfort forces people to examine beliefs they previously accepted without question. The belief that you would always remain, the belief that your attention was guaranteed, the belief that your value was somehow less than it truly was. When those beliefs collapse, a new perspective emerges. However, there is an important lesson here. Your purpose should never be to wound someone's ego. Trying to make someone jealous, insecure, or regretful is still a form of emotional dependence, because your focus remains on controlling their reaction. True growth happens when your attention returns to yourself. The most powerful ego challenge is not something you create intentionally. It is the natural consequence of self-respect. When you genuinely choose peace over pursuit, growth over obsession, and purpose over validation, other people are forced to see a version of you they never expected. And that version often commands more respect than all the explanations, sacrifices, and efforts that came before. The irony is remarkable. The less you focus on making them realize your worth, the more likely they are to recognize it. Not because you changed their mind through persuasion, but because your actions revealed a truth they could no longer ignore. Your absence from the role of pursuer becomes the mirror that reflects your value back to them. And sometimes, that reflection becomes impossible to forget. There is a moment in every person's life when they must choose between preserving a connection and preserving their self-respect. At first, the choice seems difficult, because the fear of losing someone can feel overwhelming. We convince ourselves that compromising our standards is a small price to pay for keeping a relationship alive. We tolerate behavior that hurts us. We overlook disrespect. We remain silent when our needs are ignored. We do all of this because we believe that holding on is more important than standing up for ourselves. But eventually, reality teaches a different lesson. Every time you sacrifice your dignity to gain someone's approval, you pay a hidden cost. That cost is your confidence. Little by little, you begin disconnecting from your own value. You become more focused on earning respect than embodying it. You become more concerned with being chosen than choosing yourself. The tragedy is that this strategy rarely works. People may appreciate kindness, loyalty, and patience, but they deeply respect those who respect themselves. Human beings instinctively recognize strength in those who maintain healthy boundaries. When someone consistently communicates through their actions that their time, energy, and emotional well-being matter, others begin treating them differently. This is why self-respect changes the entire dynamic. The moment you stop begging for what should be given freely, something shifts. You no longer approach the relationship from a position of scarcity. You stop acting as though another person's attention determines your worth. Instead, you begin operating from a place of inner certainty. That certainty is powerful. It changes the way you speak. It changes the way you make decisions. It changes what you are willing to tolerate. Most importantly, it changes the message you send to the world. Your behavior begins communicating, "I know my value, and I will not abandon myself to gain acceptance." For an avoidant person, this transformation can be especially impactful. Avoidant individuals often become comfortable when they sense that someone is chasing them. They may unconsciously expect the other person to keep pursuing, accommodating, and proving themselves. But when that pattern suddenly ends, they are faced with a version of you they have never encountered before. Instead of seeking validation, you have standards. Instead of chasing connection at any cost, you protect your peace. Instead of fearing loss, you trust your own worth. That shift creates respect, because respect is born from consistency. When your actions align with your values, people know where you stand. They understand that your kindness is a choice, not a weakness. They realize that your love comes with self-awareness rather than self-sacrifice. The beautiful truth is that self-respect is not about becoming cold, distant, or arrogant. It is not about punishing others or proving a point. It is about refusing to betray yourself. It is about recognizing that your needs matter too. It is about understanding that healthy relationships require mutual effort, not one-sided devotion. When you finally embrace this mindset, you become stronger than any circumstance. Whether someone stays or leaves, whether they understand your value or fail to see it, your foundation remains intact. You are no longer dependent on external validation, because you have developed something far more valuable, an unshakable respect for yourself. And once that happens, the entire dynamic changes. Not because you demanded respect, but because you became the kind of person who naturally commands it. One of the most powerful principles in human psychology is that people often fail to appreciate something fully until they realize it is no longer guaranteed. What is constantly available can become invisible. What is always present can be taken for granted. This is not because people are necessarily selfish or uncaring. It is simply a tendency of human nature to overlook abundance while becoming highly aware of scarcity. Think about how often people ignore opportunities they have every day, only to regret them once they disappear. The same principle applies to relationships. When someone believes they have unlimited access to your attention, your affection, your patience, and your energy, they may stop recognizing how valuable those things truly are. At first, your loyalty feels comforting, then it feels normal, then it feels expected, and eventually, it can become something they assume will always be there. This is where the dynamic begins to shift. The moment your availability is no longer guaranteed, perception changes. The attention that was once overlooked suddenly becomes noticeable. The conversations they barely valued begin to carry meaning. The emotional support they assumed would always exist becomes something they miss. Scarcity creates awareness, not because your value has changed, but because their ability to recognize it has. Many people spend years trying to increase their value in someone else's eyes. They work harder, give more, sacrifice more, and tolerate more. Yet despite all that effort, they often receive little appreciation in return. The reason is simple. Value is not always determined by how much you offer. It is often determined by how those offerings are perceived. When access feels unlimited, appreciation frequently decreases. When access becomes limited, attention increases. This does not mean you should play games or intentionally make yourself unavailable. Artificial scarcity is manipulation, and manipulation never creates healthy relationships. True scarcity emerges naturally when you begin prioritizing your own life. You stop rearranging your schedule for someone who gives minimal effort. You stop making another person the center of your world. You invest more energy into your goals, your health, your purpose, and your growth. As a result, your attention becomes more valuable because it is no longer given without intention. For an avoidant person, this shift can be especially powerful. Avoidants often feel comfortable when they know someone is always there waiting. The certainty allows them to maintain emotional distance while still benefiting from the SOV connection. But when they realize that your life continues moving forward without their constant involvement, something changes. Curiosity replaces certainty. Interest replaces assumption. Respect begins replacing complacency. They start seeing qualities they overlooked because those qualities are no longer constantly in front of them. They begin understanding that your presence was not an entitlement, it was a privilege. The deeper lesson is not about making someone miss you. The deeper lesson is about recognizing your own worth. When you understand that your time is valuable, your energy becomes valuable. When you understand that your attention is meaningful, others begin seeing it that way too. The scarcity that matters most is not the scarcity you create for others. It is the realization that your life is too important to be spent endlessly chasing people who fail to appreciate it. The moment you embrace that truth, you become more focused, more peaceful, and more attractive. Not because you are trying to increase your value, but because you have finally stopped giving it away without purpose. And that is when people often begin seeing what was there all along. One of the greatest misconceptions people have about influence and attraction is believing that intense emotional reactions create respect. Many assume that if they express enough pain, explain their feelings repeatedly, or fight hard enough to be understood, the other person will finally recognize their value. They believe that emotional urgency will inspire appreciation, but in reality, emotional desperation often weakens your position, while emotional stability strengthens it. There is a profound difference between expressing emotions and being controlled by them. When a person becomes consumed by the fear of losing someone, their decisions often become reactive. They send messages they later regret. They seek reassurance that never truly satisfies them. They over-explain, over-invest, and overextend themselves. Their focus shifts away from their own growth and becomes centered on managing another person's behavior. The problem is that this creates an imbalance. The more one person chases emotional certainty, the more the relationship begins revolving around anxiety rather than connection. True strength appears when you learn emotional detachment. Emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold, heartless, or indifferent. It does not mean suppressing your feelings or pretending you do not care. It means caring without surrendering your peace. It means maintaining your emotional center regardless of another person's choices. When you reach this state, something remarkable happens. You stop reacting to every change in behavior. You stop interpreting every silence as rejection. You stop allowing another person's inconsistency to dictate your emotional state. Instead, you become grounded. You observe rather than chase. You evaluate rather than beg. You respond rather than react. This calm confidence is incredibly powerful because it communicates self-control. Human beings naturally respect people who can remain composed under pressure. Anyone can feel strong when circumstances are favorable. Real strength is demonstrated when challenges arise and you still remain connected to your values. For an avoidant person, this calmness often has a profound effect. Avoidant individuals frequently expect emotional pursuit. They may be accustomed to people becoming anxious, demanding reassurance, or reacting strongly to distance. When they encounter someone who remains secure and composed, it disrupts their expectations. Instead of pressure, they experience space. Instead of emotional chaos, they encounter stability. Instead of dependency, they see independence. This often creates a level of respect that emotional pursuit never could. Why? Because emotional detachment signals abundance. It communicates that your happiness does not depend entirely on one person's attention. It shows that while you value the relationship, you also value yourself. It reveals that you are capable of loving deeply without losing your identity. The most attractive quality in any person is not perfection. It is emotional self-mastery. When you master your emotions, you stop giving away your power. You no longer need constant validation to feel secure. You no longer chase approval because your sense of worth comes from within. This inner confidence becomes visible in every interaction. People notice it, they feel it, they respect it, and often, they are drawn to it. The irony is that the less you try to force respect, the more naturally it appears. The less you seek validation, the more valuable your attention becomes. The calmer you remain, the stronger your presence feels. That is the true power of emotional detachment. It is not about disconnecting from others. It is about staying deeply connected to yourself. When you achieve that balance, you carry a quiet confidence that cannot be shaken by rejection, distance, or uncertainty. And that kind of confidence commands respect in ways words never can. One of the most fascinating truths about human nature is that people often become most attracted to you when you stop making them the center of your life and start becoming the center of your own. Not because you are trying to impress them, not because you are playing hard to get, but because genuine personal growth creates a presence that others can feel. Most people think attraction comes from attention. They believe that if they devote enough energy to another person, they will eventually be appreciated, valued, and desired. Yet the opposite often happens. The more they focus on winning someone over, the more they neglect their own development. Their goals become secondary. Their purpose becomes blurry. Their confidence becomes dependent on someone else's response. Over time, this creates a dangerous cycle. The more validation they seek, the less secure they feel. The less secure they feel, the more validation they need. And the more validation they need, the more power they hand over to another person. Personal growth breaks this cycle completely. When you begin investing in yourself, everything changes. You start learning new skills. You pursue meaningful goals. You strengthen your mind and body. You develop discipline. You build a life that excites you regardless of who is watching. This kind of growth creates something that cannot be manufactured: authenticity. People can sense when someone is trying to appear valuable, but they can also sense when someone genuinely values themselves. The difference is enormous. One feels forced. The other feels natural. As you grow, your confidence stops depending on external approval. You become less concerned with whether someone notices your worth because you are too busy living it. You stop chasing opportunities to prove yourself because your actions already speak for you. This is where true magnetism begins. Not in your words, not in your appearance, not in your ability to convince someone, but in the energy of a person who is actively becoming better every day. For an avoidant individual, this transformation can be especially compelling. Avoidants are often accustomed to people pursuing them, seeking reassurance, and making them the primary focus of their emotional world. When they encounter someone who is deeply committed to their own growth, the dynamic changes dramatically. Instead of desperation, they see direction. Instead of neediness, they see purpose. Instead of dependency, they see strength. That strength creates intrigue because it cannot be controlled. It does not revolve around gaining approval. It comes from an internal commitment to excellence. The beautiful irony is that the more you focus on becoming the best version of yourself, the less obsessed you become with whether someone desires you. You begin measuring success by your own standards rather than another person's attention. You become motivated by purpose instead of validation. And purpose is incredibly attractive. A person with purpose radiates certainty. They wake up with direction. They make decisions based on principles rather than emotions. They understand that their future is too important to be placed in the hands of someone else's approval. This mindset transforms every area of life. You become more resilient because your happiness is no longer tied to one outcome. You become more confident because your value comes from within. You become more attractive because you are no longer trying to be attractive. The greatest lesson is this: personal growth is not a strategy to make someone respect you, miss you, or desire you. It is a commitment to honoring your own potential. Yet as a natural consequence of that commitment, people often begin seeing you differently. They notice the confidence. They notice the peace. They notice the purpose. And they are drawn to the person you became when you finally stopped chasing validation and started pursuing your destiny. That is the kind of magnetism that lasts, because it is built on growth, character, and an unwavering belief in your own worth.